Hi guys, this is Mark. In one of the earlier videos in this training course, I talked about the user status column in the users table and modifying it using Backendless console, enabling a user or disabling, and sometimes that user status may be set to email confirmation pending. And one thing that I did not mention it is there is an API that allows you to control user status and either enable or disable a user. And by now, since we have done so many other things and we talked about user management from the API perspective, it would be a good time to talk about modifying user status programmatically. And this is what this video is about. I will demonstrate how it works. I want to mention that modifying user status and marking a user to be either enabled or disabled is also a secure function. It can be used only from cloud code because otherwise it could present a security hole if anyone would be able to invoke that method publicly. So it needs to be done only from a controlled environment such as cloud code. So to demonstrate how this works, I have extended one of the pages that we used to get users by role. And in here, I added a new set of controls, essentially just one, this toggle, that will be used to, one, display whether a user is enabled or disabled. And by toggling this toggle, you can change the user status. So at this point, this is just the UI. I haven't done adding any logic, and I will walk you through of implementing this functionality so you can actually see both how it is done in UI Builder, although I did mention multiple times that this course is not about UI Builder, but we have used it so many times where I think it would be worthwhile just to see how things are done in UI Builder. But the main point of this video is to demonstrate how to modify user status. So first of all, this repeater renders all the user objects that are returned based on the selection of role. So we have a collection of user objects, and as a result, we can use data binding to render data as it becomes available. So first of all, displaying the user status, whether a user is enabled or disabled, will be done like this. So I'm selecting this toggle, and in the checked state logic right here, and this is the logic that controls whether the toggle is enabled or disabled, checked or not, we will be adding the following logic. So in here, user list item data is going to be a specific user object that was retrieved from the server in response to selecting user role. So in here, what we will do is we will check user status value in this object, and we will do this using this right here, this one. So we will get the property user status from this block, and this block represents the current user, and we will compare the value that we got to the word enabled. So what this does is if the user status equals enabled, this block returns true, and that means that the toggle will be checked. If it is disabled, it's going to be unchecked. So let's see how well that works first, and then we will program modifying the user status from the UI all the way to the backend. So before we do this, let's mark a couple of users as disabled just to create the test data. So for instance, now we have a couple of them as disabled, and now let's run our page. We will select a user, and as you can see, we have this working. So these two users are disabled, and then these users are enabled. And the same thing goes for the villains. Dr. Octopus as a user is disabled. So far so good. That was actually pretty easy. Now let's add the logic where if we click on that toggle, we want a request to go out to update that user. So for this, let's select this toggle and then go into the logic, and we will be working with the onChange event. Let's add the logic here. So what will need to happen here is, first of all, we will need to go all the way into the cloud code where the cloud code will modify this user, because in here, there is really no functionality in Codeless. There is no Codeless block to modify that user. So before we do anything here, let's actually add cloud code function, an API operation that will be updating that user. And for this, I'm going to switch to the backend and go to cloud code. I already have an API service called user service. So let's add a method that we will call enable user. The parameter will be enable. That's going to be a Boolean. So if the value of enable is true, we will need to enable user. And if it is false, that we will need to disable user. And based on that, let's actually change the method name to change user status. And then another parameter is the actual going to be identity of that user, but the identity here, and you will see why, it is going to be not the actual identity value, but object ID. Every single record in Backendless has object ID, which is a unique value assigned by Backendless itself. So we will call this user object ID, and that is a string. Click save, and the placeholder will be created. We have it here, and let's modify this. So the core element, the core block, the core API of this video is modifying user status. And if you go into under Backendless into users API, you will see that there is this block, set user status as disabled for user with ID. That's the one that we want to use. And then you can choose between disabled or enabled. So here, based on this is the logic that we will add. If method argument enable, and that's Boolean. So if this is true, then we want to enable our user. And then the parameter here, the ID, is the second argument of that API service. And let's add else. And then replicate this for the else case. In this case, it will be disabled for the same one. And this is the implementation of our method. So let's deploy it. It is now deployed. And let's go back to the front end and finish the implementation of the click on this toggle. So this is the on change event. So first of all, we want to modify the actual user object that is in memory that is used to render all the data, because that is what's used by our check logic. So we need to modify this object just so the check logic can trigger it back visually and then make a request to the API service to update it actually in the server. So step number one is to set property in list item data, which is the user object. The value of the property name is user status, and then the value will be this. So changed value is the current state of the toggle, like whenever you click, what it's changing to. So if we're changing to true, then the value of this property needs to be enabled. Otherwise, it will be disabled. What this does, it strictly updates the actual data model, the underlying object that is used in the UI to update the current state. But to update it on the server side, we need to go to our user service. And for this, I'm gonna, right now it is outside of my recording area, so let me do this. I will make this window smaller so you can see that right here there's user service, and then change user status block is right here. So we don't care about the result, and let's call this API method. And the enable parameter will be our changed value, and the user object ID is going to come from user list item data, because that object ID is one of the properties we're fetching from the server whenever we select user role. So in here, get property object ID from this guy. That's it. So this updates the visual state. This updates the server-side value in the database. Let's rerun this page. And now we select our superheroes. Let's enable everyone. And let's take a look in the database if Captain America and Spider-Man are now enabled. Backend, data. And as you can see, everyone is enabled except for Dr. Octopus. Now, what if we disable everyone? Take a look here, refresh. So as you can see, everyone is now disabled. So this is working quite well, exactly as we would like. So now the UI is wired to the backend. And the most important thing is you know that in Cloud Code, we have this blog that can be used to modify user status. That's it. Thank you for watching this video, guys. And as always, happy Backendless coding.